大家周六晚上好，我是 IvyCompass CEO 索菲亚，非常高兴今天晚上 hosting 另外一个非常有价值的一个讲座和分享。那么按照惯例，我还是提前介绍一下我们这个平台 AFI。AFI stand for Alliances for Impact，中文名字叫影响力联合会，是一个在501C3纽约成立的非营利公益组织。我们就是通过这样的一个知识分享，把很好的资源和经过我们筛选的资源介绍和推荐给大家。那么大家有这样的一个需求的时候，就知道可以去哪里寻找这样对自己有影响力和有作用的一些好的资源和一些好的这个知识。那我们 AFI 呢，通过这样的一个讲座呢，主要的这个功能呢是提高我们对主流社会的一个影响力和提高我们整个亚裔的社会地位。那么大家素质提高了，影响力就会慢慢提高。我们是通过4个板块，如果您还不是我们的一个社区的一份子的话呢，欢迎你扫描左边的二维码，扫描，这样的话小助手会把你带到我们的微信群里头去。那4大板块，其中一大板块是成年人的公益讲座，我们通过对影响力的人物采访，还有一些金融、投资、科技以及其他行业的一些知识分享，还有包括社会热点的访谈等等，来给大家提供信息。第二大板块是我们的青少年华二代，叫亚法组织。那这个组织呢，也帮助了很多非常优秀的青少年，在这样的一个平台上面去搭建和锻炼他们的领导力，从而在申请大学的时候能够获得非常有实际案例的和整个成熟程度的一个增加。第三大板块呢是我们的亲子学院 TCPC，我们对一些有自闭症、ADHD 的多动症和强迫症一些特殊需求的家庭给予很多的帮助和 workshop。那第四大板块是大家很熟悉的一些生活类的一些健身呐、种花种菜的一些分享。那今天晚上的 feature 呢是 IvyCompass，指南针教育咨询是 AFI 旗下的一个姐妹组织。那我们的宗旨呢是致力于将北美口碑最好的前藤校招生官、独立的升学顾问，还有一些跟音乐呀、体育呀，还有作品集相关的等等稀缺的教育资源，对接给我们全球的华人家庭。所以我们的覆盖面不仅仅是北美、加拿大、香港、中国大陆、新加坡。甚至于埃及，我们有学生是从埃及这个国家过来的。那因为 IvyCompass 有这样的一个 AFI 这样的前面的这个 mother 的这个 umbrella 的组织，所以我们是可以提供一些非常定制化的志愿者的机会，还有一些对社会特别有影响力的一些背景啊、科研等等、实习等等背景项目。我们的观点和宗旨是，我们认为升学这个事情是应该在高中期间给予一系列的机会，让孩子在有能力、有条件的情况下，除了把自己的学习和 GPA，能够搞定，同时还有时间精力去参加一些对社会有意义的活动，从而让这个孩子和这个高中生在申请步入大学之前就能够变得比较成熟，能够把自己的生活和工作还有学习都安排得很好。这个工作我说的是学校以外的这些内容哈，包括那个实习啊，还有一些这个research。那我们的那个服务内容呢，包括了一些美本申请。只要跟升学相关的内容，我们都会提供给我们的社区，包括今天晚上要跟大家分享的这个主题内容，所以像 research 啊，像 art music，还有一些联合国的一些项目，还有包括 SAT、ACT、IP，还有科创，还有物理竞赛、数学竞赛，总之跟升学相关的方方面面，我们IvyCompass 团队都在搭建。一些很好的资源，filter 很好的资源，然后推荐给我们的这个社区。那为什么是我们机构呢？那外面的升学机构非常非常多哈，我们很自豪，依然在这个我们的 market 有一定的这个信任度和有一定的口碑啊，大家对我们的这个口碑还是非常可观和 positive 的。那因为我们 IvyCompass 每年我们的人数和学生人数是控制的啊，我们不无限制的扩张，我们 focus on 质量，focus on quality，make sure。Every single student signing with us 都能够获得 enough 的 attention 哈，因为我们垂直式的服务模式，因为每一个这个学生进来呢，首先在签约之前他就知道跟哪位导师是喜欢的，是匹配的。我们第一通过学生的 personality，通过他的这个 know how，通过他的这个 GPA，通过他的一些 personality。 匹配到一些合适的导师，这个导师会一直跟随3年、4年。还是2年、1年啊？我们现在也有 last minute 的学生，进来经过我们导师的一些 SA 的辅导啊，或一些 last minute 整理这个档案和一些资料的这个辅导都是有的。那不像有一些机构呢，你进去以后，因为你是一个所谓的大机构，那么你就是一个 number，那你 number 进去了以后，难免有的时候会 multiply change for different kind of coach，然后可能还会一些板块式的，就是有的导师做 strategy，然后有的导师是做背景提升，还有的导师可能做 essay 的 editing，这样碎片化的很容易有的时候这个 information 就是 falling through the crack。那么学生有的时候就不能够很好的让导师非常完整的去 understanding。我相信等会儿 Steven and his team introduce 的服务也是有 multiple 的这个 people give it 不同这个 angle 的这个 support 哈。但是我们这边也是会有不同的人，就像一辆火车上去，那么前面的这个学生和导师，我说是这个 engine，那会有 ACT 的老师上车来做一些 ACT 的辅导，然后有research 的导师上来做一些research 的一些指导。总之，some resource will be in and out of that train, but that train is running towards the final destination。希望到了那个12年级在申请的时候，这个学生已经有足够的竞争力去为这些能够打开的学校，为他们来这个作为匹配和打开，就申请到他们理想的学校啊。然后呢，因为我们有这样的一个 FI 的这个 motherhood 的这个平台，所以我们还会获得一些非常 unique 的一些 opportunity。最重要的是，我们的观点和价值观是，升学它只是一个杠杆，只是一个平台，只是一个 platform。我们希望通过这么一件事情，在不同的高中期间，9年级也好，10年级也好，给学生介绍一些不同的 team 和不同的资源，让这个孩子能够获得本身自身的成长啊。那么，每个机构都会去讲他们的录取结果，那么我们也不落俗套，也要分享一下前面 Top 30的这个，我们这个导师们都是有学生的影子哈，在这些学校我就不一一列举了。我们的网站 IvyCompass，如果您还不熟悉我们的指南针网站的话，欢迎您上去。我们有过去很多的这个分享和讲座，包括 research 的，包括 internship 的，包括这个科创的、物理的哈，这些讲座都有。那么您可以去看看有什么您觉得对您有帮助和有价值的。那导师们呢？这边落举几个啊，这几个像 John 啊、Don 啊、普林斯顿的 Jason 是哈佛的，那么还有 multiple 不同 level 的，因为每个家长的 budget，每个家庭的 budget 不一样，所以每个这个 level 的导师，我们价格也会不一样。包括我们刚刚提及的这些像 Shen 是 civil engineer 的，像 Ray 是 economic 的 background，像这个 Dr. Yang 是physics，还有 music 和 Jenny 是耶鲁毕业的 film 和 photographer 的。我们匹配这些老师都是为了供给我们 potential 的家庭在需要的时候，在不同的阶段来这个 seeking for match。那今天晚上呢，非常高兴，我就不对嘉宾做一一这个介绍。那 Steven 呢是一个老朋友了哈long time friend 呀，we really did a lot of things together。那么今天晚上他们会给我们作为一个主题来分享，怎么样在高中进入大学了之后，你就开始要迎接下一阶段的准备了，因为申请到大学不是我们的终点，不是我们的 final destination。they need to study in their colleges。紧接着，他们就应该在 college 像高中一样的4年开始准备大学1年级的 freshman 他的这个实习。大学2年级、大学3年级，怎么样从一步一步自己的这个很好的规划，怎么去实习，怎么去 seeking 和 leaking for 一些 resources，来 benefiting yourself，equip yourself，从而在你大学3年级的时候，希望能够找到一个 ideal 的你想去的机构实习，从而为你在4年级大学毕业找到一份心仪的工作，做一个非常好的铺垫和锻炼。如果没有这样的一个 mindset in mind 的话，我相信很多孩子到了大学4年级的时候，会茫然的发现自己递送了200份、1000份 resume，依然没有新的工作 landing on their hand。那么家长也跟着着急，等你那个时候再来找我们的所谓的 resource。Yes, they can do last magic, of course they can。但是如果孩子能够早一点的有这样的一个 mindset， 能够 starting way beginning, right finish going to the dream school, right after that start thinking what is my next 4 years ago，然后开始有团队进一步的，就像高中有人辅导您一样，我相信这个路会走得更加顺一点，然后孩子们也会更强大一些。所以我们的目标是让孩子更加强大。所以 let me give the floor to Stephen. Now the show is yours.
Thank you, thank you. 大家好，我是 Steven. I probably will speak in English for this presentation. I've done some presentation in Chinese, but I think you guys will find it painful. It is so great to see everyone. Hope you guys are having a good evening, or if anyone's in their morning, good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit today. There's three of us who are going to, actually four of us who are going to share one via video about our different journeys. This will be split across both investment banking, data science, and consulting. And we'll talk just at a high level by the end of this, which will probably take about 45 minutes, 50 minutes for us to talk, and then we'll leave some time for some questions. You should have a sense of what are some of the things that you should be doing, or the expectations for students that will get the job offers in finance, consulting, and tech by the time that they graduate from undergrad or potentially from master's. We have actually a really diverse group of people speaking today. I grew up in the US, so lived also in big time in Asia, lived in Taipei. But I'm a US citizen, so I give that perspective. We have people who are international students who have come in, gotten jobs. We also have students who are Chinese American who have come in. So just to give you a sense of the range of experiences. In fact, I think people talk a lot about, as an international student, how do you get a job? It's much more difficult. Of course, there's H-1B changes. It seems like that will affect some recruiting, particularly for smaller firms, though I think larger firms likely will stay broadly the course. But we'll talk a bit about that so you guys can get a sense of, okay, what does it look like? And by the end of it, you'll see that there's actually a lot of very similar themes of being prepared, doing well in school, being proactive in terms of meeting the right people, and being able to interview well as well. But I'll quickly introduce myself before I go in. I'll probably talk for about 10, 15 minutes. I'll particularly focus on the finance side of things. And then we'll have another team member talk about investment banking. And then we have two people who have done great on the consulting side as well. I can also speak to the tech side, as I work as a data scientist, had offers from places like Tencent when I was undergrad as well, recruited at places like Google, Facebook, et cetera. So I can also speak to that. And we work with students there as well. But quickly on myself, so I'm Steven. It's great to meet you guys. A bit of background on myself. So I grew up kind of in and out of Asia. My dad's professor. He taught at the University of Missouri. I did not know really much of anything about how to get a job besides how to get into a PhD program. I knew a lot about that because my dad's professor, but in terms of getting a job, I really had no context. I was really lucky. I went to Harvard as an undergrad, and but even at Harvard, Harvard's a great place, but there's not that much in terms of resources for students who are coming from, I would say, non-finance, non-consulting, entrepreneur family backgrounds in terms of how do you think about your career process. For the first couple of years, I did well in school. I ended up, with a good GPA and good scores, et cetera. But I didn't really do anything when it came to internships. And it was only in my junior year when I began to look around and I saw my friends getting jobs I had a good friend of mine who had a return offer at Bain, another friend who was going to Goldman Sachs. And I was like, what the heck? These guys are not smarter than me. They suck. I'm much better. This is what my self-narrative, of course, probably wrong, but I was like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? That's then allowing them to get these jobs. And the reality was that they were just better prepared. They were thinking strategically about, okay, what do I want to get in terms of job-wise? How do I approach it? And how do I build network for it? Luckily, I had one mentor who was an upperclassman of mine at Harvard who was returning to McKinsey. He kind of put me under his wing, said, hey, Steven, you're being an idiot. Here's the things you need to do. And I was lucky to then get into McKinsey. And I worked across Boston. I was first in the Boston office, and then I transferred to the Beijing office as well. So I worked in China for a year, which was, I think, 特别卷 is the way I think I would describe it. So if you have the opportunity to work in the US office first, I'd recommend that. And then you can always go back to China if you want to do that as well. The GC office is fabulous, but a little bit more intense than, let's say, the Boston office. Okay, but today I'm going to talk mainly about investment banking with Wall Street Guide, which is the company that I run in partnerships with Sophia and part of our broader ecosystem called Lumiere of companies. We focus on helping students get that first job, usually post-graduation. About 20% of our students are master's students as well. I'm going to talk about investment banking. About half our students look at investment banking, and I think investment banking is the best case study to understand first because it is the most intense of all of the recruiting process, and it's the earliest as well. And so we can just understand a little bit about what happens there. How do you ultimately get a job in investment banking? And if you get a job in, we call it IB, investment banking, then you can get a job also in consulting. And if you have a technical skill set, also the same skill set can work for tech and data science recruiting or tech recruiting as well. I saw a question on that earlier. We're going to talk about some of the complexities, what banks look for, and standing out of the crowd, and then scaffolding your efforts. And then I'm going to pass to 3 panelists who are just amazing, who have gotten the jobs, and they're going to talk particularly about their experience. I find for me, the way that I learn best is by just seeing examples. So you see a few examples, you begin to pattern match a bit better, as opposed to kind of high level abstract thinking of what it takes. This is a little bit about us, of course. My co-founder works at Bridgewater, which is the largest hedge fund in the world, and students kind of go on to do great things across different investment banks. But let's talk a little bit about what investment banking is. You may have heard about it. You may be connected to it. You may not. Certainly, for me, it wasn't something I was very familiar with when I first came into college. But the way to think about investment banking is when people say finance. So a lot of students will say, oh, I'm interested in finance. Usually what that means is, as a first step, is investment banking. Not always, but usually that's what it means. The way to think about investment banking is as 2 ways. One is, what does it do for the world, and what does it do for you in your career? I think there's actually slightly different. Investment banks are essentially at the in-between of companies and financial transactions. So that means that they are helping out with things like mergers and acquisitions, buying, selling, merging companies. They might be in the middle of helping with things like debt issuances, so where you're giving out debt, where you're raising capital by using equity. There are different things that they could be doing. They could be restructuring, but essentially anytime a company is doing some type of financial complex transaction, an investment bank is there, and they're usually helping to manage that, usually taking some percentage of the deal. That's kind of what they do. Now, why does it matter? And I think the more interesting thing is, why is it a relevant thing for you guys to think about? Is investment banking is usually the entry point for most people into finance, who then move quickly in finance. Now, there are, of course, other ways to enter into finance, but this is the most common one. The most common path that people take is they enter into investment banking. Let's say a firm like Goldman Sachs, which would be called like the bulge bracket. It just means it's a very large bank. They work there for between 1.5 to 3 years, and then they move on to their next step, which is usually moving into what is called the buy side. And the buy side, what that means there is that you are the one buying things, whether that is equity, bonds, whatever. You might hear of terms like a hedge fund, private equity firm. Those are essentially the buy side, if you will. And the reason why you make that transition is that the buy side is more lucrative. You make more money. There was actually an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, which is about hedge fund managers making so much money. They now have agents because their deals can be multi-million-dollar deals, and they can be quite young. I have friends of mine from undergrad who have been paid $20 million in 1 year because of deals that they've made. Of course, not everyone is getting paid $20 million, but that's just an example of what could happen. But the way you get there usually is through the investment bank. So the investment bank is the intermediary. It's the pathway. It's the stepping stone for you to then get into the buy side. Some students, I would say maybe the very strongest students, like the top, let's say 5% of students in finance at the top 10 schools will go directly to these firms go directly into the buy side, but it's not super common. More common is for you to go into investment bank. So that's the path that we recommend for most students, unless you are, truly exceptional in a really competitive environment. Okay. I see a few questions. 有回放吗? I actually don't know what 回放 is, but if you want to send it in the chat, I'm happy to also answer questions as well directly, so that you guys can answer it. Now, another reason also that the investment banks are really valuable and why most firms in finance really value it is because of the skill development. If you've heard of someone working in finance, working from 8 a.m. to midnight, you're probably thinking of some analyst investment banking. So what that means is essentially that this is the place where you're building up the skill set, which you then apply for the rest of your life. And when we think about it, it's that signaling factor that is so important. The signaling factor for you for the rest of for the rest of your career, essentially, particularly if you stay within finance. I see a question about clubs. I can talk about that. Yeah, okay, this is excellent. Yeah, I see two. Okay, great. So I see two club questions on clubs. We can talk about that in a second in our timeline. I think the short answer, and I'll let our panelists share a little bit about that, is we work with dozens of students actually for the Wall Street Guide. I would say we also have dozens of mentors. So our mentors are working at the bulge brackets, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, at the elite boutique banks, Evercore, et cetera, for investment banking. It is very common that they're in these clubs. I would say 80 to 90% of them are in some finance related club. And the reason for that is, there's two main reasons for it. So one is that the clubs are the conduits, they're the pathways to the network. So the clubs are often the place of the network. So you would say, you reach out to someone, oh, hey, I know that you're right now at JP Morgan. Actually, I'm part of the same club as you. I'm actually the treasurer. I'm the president. Maybe could we talk? That's a really important connection point. That's even more important for, I would call, semi-targets or non-targets, but also very important for targets. The second is that the clubs also serve as a skill building function. So you enter into the club, most of the clubs are about you understanding, okay, what does it take for me to actually get these jobs, whether it's the finance technical curriculum or the just behavioral stuff. Do I need to know? So it's not necessary. I would say it's less necessary for consulting than it is for banking, and is even less necessary for tech, especially if you're a software engineer, than for consulting. So there's some differences here, but if you're looking at finance, I would highly recommend going for those clubs. It's not necessary, but it's an important step for you to be successful. And I would say it's when we work with our students in their first or second year, we think about club targeting as being a distinct step in the process of you being competitive. It also helps you signal that you're interested in finance. Okay, excellent. I see a few more questions. Okay, excellent. Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about salary progression. This is a little bit about why someone might be thinking about finance as a career. I think it's useful for you guys to understand, because I'll talk a bit about then the process and how it can be so selective. So essentially for investment banking and particularly finance in general, the reason why it's so attractive is that it's an extremely high leverage profession. So that means that you are working with really big transaction amounts, which means that the people who work on it can then be paid quite a bit as well. For example, our firm does some M&A ourselves, and you might have a transaction of anywhere from $5 million to $5 billion, and you could have a team of investment bankers of 5 people. So there's a lot of leverage. That means that the people who are working on it can get paid quite a bit. Just to see it, I think most of your total compensation comes from your bonus. If you move into private equity or hedge funds, you begin to get paid more, and your work hours are a little bit less intense as well. So, but you can expect to be paid, high 6 digits relatively quickly, low six digits, of course, at first. And then within 5 years, you're usually looking at above, the $500,000 mark in terms of compensation. So you're paid very well. Also a difference, I would say, between finance and tech. Tech actually has a higher paying at first, but tends to level out as you get more senior, whereas finance has a big long tail. The longer you stay, the more you get paid. So this is a little difference between tech. And consulting matches finance more closely, but if you stay in the consulting firms, you'll usually, there's less of a long tail. So you might be paid, a couple $1 million a year if you end up being a partner or a senior partner at a firm like McKinsey. Okay, I see a few questions more about freshman summer and clubs. So excellent questions. I really, really like that. Also, let our panelists in a second talk about their experience, so you can get a sense of, okay.
Yeah, Stephen, you can let people listing all the questions there in the chat box, and we can answer question towards the end. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Fabulous. So we'll get to some of these questions towards the end. We will address these questions because you'll see it in these people's experiences. So just give a little sense of these types of investment banks, hedge funds, et cetera. So you have sense. Investment banks are firms like Goldman Sachs, Citi, Morgan Stanley, Jefferies. Hedge funds and private equity firms I find are like a little bit like more like abstract. You're kind of like, what the heck is this? Essentially, they're just like people who have a bunch of money pooled together who are then buying things. Hedge funds and private equity firms are a little different in terms of their approach, but they're essentially doing the same thing. Hedge funds are like Bridgewater, Citadel, Point72. Some of these are quantitative hedge funds, meaning that they're doing more algorithmic trading. Private equity firms are places like Apollo, Blackstone, Carlyle, KKR. This is UTPG. They're usually taking very active positions in the companies they take, usually using what's called an LBO or a leverage, which just means they take debt in order to buy other companies. That means they get bigger returns because they took more risk with it. That's all it means. So these are just some example firms to give you a sense of what you're thinking about when you're looking. Now let's talk a little bit about the competitiveness of these jobs. And here I want to be a little bit clear about how to think about this competitiveness. Now, it's very similar to college. So why do I say it's similar to college? Now, the numbers alone make it look insanely competitive. It almost looks like, why should I even apply? Why should I even apply? It's way competitive. But the reality is, and we see this with our students every year, is that there are many students that in a non-probabilistic way or just simply, it's extremely unlikely they actually get many offers. So some people are getting a lot of offers. Most people are not even getting an interview. So what's going on there? The big difference is that you have a lot of applications at McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Google, et cetera. But the vast majority of those applications are just not competitive. Their GPA is not strong enough. They have not networked into the company. They don't have enough context. They just know, oh, working at a place like McKinsey sounds cool. It sounds like something I should do. They throw in an application, but they're not well prepared. So for most people, which is kind of general application, this is the application, right? But however, if you're really well positioned, you can be much more likely to get these firms. And most students we work with end up getting a job like in investment banking, consulting, et cetera, tech. So it's very doable. However, it is competitive, and it's competitive because these firms don't take that many people. They don't take that many people because, of course, McKinsey as a total has about 10, 20,000 consultants. They're taking an order class of about, we have 1,000, 2,000 interns, or 1,000, 2,000 new analysts roughly each year. It kind of depends year by year. The New York office might take 70, for example, to give you a sense of it for McKinsey. So let's talk about investment banking, and then we can talk a little bit about what the process looks like. So investment banking recruiting is different. Applications are sooner than most students expect. Interviews happen before junior year begins. So before your third year begins, you've already interviewed and gotten your offer for your junior summer internship. And most students miss out because they don't know that timeline. It's really unavailable. So the reality is that most students just don't know how to get these jobs. And I'll just go back to my experience when I was a junior at Harvard. I was looking around, and I was doing really well. You know, I was part of Phi Beta Kappa. I was like, you know, I'd done all the things. I was studying statistics. I was taking very hard classes. I was president of a couple clubs. I was like, oh my God, I'm like the guy. Like I'm doing really well. And I looked around and I had these friends who had offers at banks, and I didn't even know it at the time, but I'd completely missed the opportunity to recruit for banking. I had no chance to get into banking. Now, ultimately, I went to consulting. It's really fine, but if I wanted to, I would have just missed it. And that's because the investment banking timeline is very aggressive. And it's something that as a student, as a freshman or sophomore, you need to be thinking about if you want to be competitive to ultimately get that offer. Now, the reason a lot of students don't get the job is that they don't have a network. They're not connected into these firms. They don't have the technical skills to then interview, and they don't have a plan. The technical skills is often the thing that is easiest for people to get because it's clear that they need it. So like, okay, I know they're technical interviews. Let me just study online. No, that's fine. Most students don't even get the offer, or most students don't even get the first round interview offer because they not networked in. They don't have context. Also, don't have a plan to then do that. So that's one of the big gaps that we've observed. What do investment banks look for? Just to give you a sense of it. Usually, you're looking for a reasonably high GPA. 3.7 above is kind of minimum. If you're at a real like if you're like a target school, target school would be there's about, you know, let's say 20 target schools for investment banks, but let's say you're at Cornell, for example, which would be a target school for most firms, then you can maybe get away with a little bit less if you're really connected into finance, like you're president of your club, you've done some great internships, et cetera. Ideally, you have relevant experiences. Now, this is really fun because you're applying as a sophomore, so you only had one summer to have relevant experiences. Okay, so how do you do that? It's a little difficult. What you need to do there is that you need to be part of clubs. You maybe need to have a freshman summer internship, just something that feels relevant. Of course, you're pretty much 19 at the time you apply, so they don't expect you to have like a lot of experience, but some experience. Leadership potential, ideally you are in one of these clubs or you are doing something entrepreneurial, and then you should have strong technical and behaviorals. And ultimately, investment banks are very in-group, out-group like. So what that means is that you should be able to speak in the same language that they would speak in, or simply put, you should be able to speak about investment banks in the way that they speak about it. That means you have to really have high context for like what investment banking is, what finance is, what group you want to be part of. So you just need to spend time doing that. Recruiting also moves fast. So this is something I think a lot of parents don't know, a lot of students don't know. Certainly, I didn't know it when I was first year at Harvard. So your sophomore, fall, and winter, this is when your junior internship apps are open. Now, and Jimmy, we should note this in the slide, I think, for next time, is like, why does the junior internship offer matter so much? This is the offer that dictates whether you get into finance. So 90% of people who get into finance get in through their junior summer internship. So just repeat that. Most people will get into their full-time job through their third year summer internship. So that's really important. That internship you get your sophomore year. So a year and a half before you do the internship, you get the offer. Okay, so just to make that timeline clear, your second year, around January, you apply and you usually interview within a couple of months. That's when you get the offer for your junior summer internship, which then dictates your full-time job. So I just want to talk about that, which means that for you to land essentially a full-time job in finance, you need to be ready by your sophomore fall, essentially. So that's the speed that you need to go at, and that's why a lot of students miss it. That's 18 months after they start. So I saw some freshmen in the chat. That's great. We can talk a little bit about what strategies you guys should use in order to be competitive in this process. So here is here's a timeline, for example, for let's say a freshman right now that you guys could be thinking about. And if you are a freshman, I'd actually recommend you like taking a screenshot just so you can get a sense of this. So you're starting university, we would recommend you go pretty hard on these clubs. Now, of course, they're competitive. There are many clubs usually. There's a range of competitiveness. You should get into at least one of these clubs. There's specific ways to do that. It's very similar to recruiting. You should come off as competent. You should meet people. You should network in. there's some strategies that we talk about that we work with students on. You apply for freshman summer opportunities. This is, I saw some questions on that. We can address that a little bit later, but essentially freshman summer opportunities come in one of two categories. They are either opportunities that are provided by the school. Like we have one student at Brown who's very talented, who's working at a fintech company in Sweden actually this summer. She's also Chinese, and she got that offer through Brown. So Brown helped provide some of that. There's these structured programs. That's something I did as well my freshman summer. The second way you get a summer offer is through a pretty intense networking, or potentially through an organization like WSG. We help students out with their freshman internship too. But that networking essentially means that you're reaching out to firms. You're saying, hey, here's my background, here's what I'm interested in, et cetera. And then you have to just hustle a lot on that. But there's certain strategies you can do. That freshman summer is probably the one summer which matters a little bit less than others. So you don't need to if you don't get a 10 out of 10 internship your freshman summer, that's usually fine. You just need to show that interest in finance itself. You want to be networking starting the following summer, so your sophomore summer, with full-time banking associates. These are the people who ultimately provide the referrals, which will then allow you to then get the first round interviews. That's essentially the process. Usually people from your school, these are the people who ultimately make the referral that then matters for you. You're going to learn banking technicals usually that summer. Usually your second year summer is when you should start thinking about your technical curriculum. Some students do it earlier, some students do it a little bit later, but this is roughly the right time that we've observed. Starting September, you're applying for sophomore summer opportunities. There's a weird thing that goes on where many students actually receive their junior summer offer before their sophomore summer, because that's a summer that returns back. And usually sophomore summer offers are usually with like less prestigious firms. So that's just a mixed experience. Some students will get their sophomore summer pretty early. Some will get it later. We have mentors who are at Goldman Sachs who have got their junior summer offer and then didn't get their sophomore summer offer until like May of their second year. So it's a very strange thing, but that happens. This year is quite important. By January of your sophomore year, you're applying for junior summer opportunities. That means you're usually applying in the first week of January. That's when we see most apps are opening up. Some open up a little bit earlier. And then hopefully by the next 2-3 months, you've secured your offer, and then you have a year and a half to just live a great life at school, and then you begin your job, hopefully. So that's essentially the process. If you aren't able to make that offer, then usually there is another round of hiring that happens your junior fall and another your senior fall for offers, but it's a little bit more rare, and it is frankly more difficult. So there's the only other place. I don't want to talk too much about this, but essentially at Wall Street Guide, we help you work one-on-one with you to help you set and essentially achieve those goals you have across investment banking, consulting, tech. We have mentors who work across all of them. Of course, you're doing tech. We're looking at people who are more like software engineer, places like Google, Facebook, et cetera. If investment banking, then you'd be working with usually a group of mentors who are at bulge bracket firms like Goldman Sachs or elite boutiques like Evercore. We essentially help you on the strategy to make sure you're doing the right things, help you with the network, and then also help you place placements with early internships if you need it as well, just to make sure that you are moving along in that results. Ultimately, most students end up getting these jobs and then doing really well. Of course, I do want a disclaimer. It's a lot of work. Okay, so we're only looking for students. I think Sophia said it up top about like, we're not working with just any students. We need students who are able to put in the time and the effort in order to be successful. If you don't put in the time, it's gonna be hard for you to be successful. So I want to be just honest about that. I think that's really, I think that's just the reality. Now, what are some top candidates doing differently? They're understanding their target firms very well. Usually candidates will know people at every firm that they get a final offer at, and they can distinguish between firms. So if right now, you're hearing the difference between like Evercore and Lazard, and you're like, I've never even heard these terms, that's super normal. But by the time you apply, you should be like, oh, I really want to be, here's why I think PJT or whatever is like a good fit for me, whatever. Like that's the type of thing that you should be able to you should be doing. You need your resume and behavioral technical interviews to be really strong. That's super important. You need to be networked in, particularly from your own school, to these firms. And then it's really important that you are targeting these finance experience early. It's either working with a boutique bank. I saw some questions about early internships. Boutique banks just means small bank, or a small investment bank can and often do offer internships to freshmen and sophomores. That'd be usually where you would be targeting. And then you could look at fintech, business development roles, etc. Anyways, what we do is we help you throughout that whole process, making sure that you're positioned to the right career, you're doing intensive interview preparation, and then ultimately you're getting the offer itself. We've done this with dozens of students. Most of our students, we have, I think, 3 students at Stanford right now, 4 at Cornell. We have a number of students at semi or non-targets. We have students at UCSD, UC Berkeley, UC Michigan, University of Michigan. So big range of students who are usually targeting these types of firms and tend to be doing very well through it. So, okay, I am going to stop talking. By the way, if you're interested, there's a form here that you can scan a QR code, or you can fill that out if you want to jump on a call with us, and we can do a free session just to talk about you and your profile and how you might develop your own strategy. Now, I would like to pass to, we have 2, and if we have time, I can share something from a third, but I think let's just start with those who are live right now. So I'm hoping to pass to Thanh, who's super talented, as you'll see, has gotten offers at a bunch of different firms, and kind of can give you an example of someone who's really, I think, shown the hustle. I'm like the white guy from Harvard vibe. So Thanh is the hustler who really made things happen. So Thanh, I'll pass to you, and I'll let you share screen if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Just give me a sec. I'm gonna share my screen. All right. Let me know if you guys can can see my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, do you guys, are you seeing it in full screen or just like half screen?
We're seeing it in like half screen right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. What about now? Still.
You had it for like just a second, I think. Yeah,
There we
no,
go. Yeah, that's
Okay, got you. All right. Thank you, Stephen, for the very nice introduction. And yeah, thank you again, Sophia, for having me. My name is Thanh, so I'm originally from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Currently, I'm a second-year master's student at Cornell, studying applied economics. I'm passionate about research and management and sustainability, the intersection between those two, and like industry career-wise, I'm interested in will fortunately be starting my career in strategy consulting at McKinsey. And I'm just gonna jump straight to my like overall academic and professional journey. So I was in Vietnam until I was 18. So basically did my entire 12-year school like back home in Vietnam. And then I went to Italy to do my undergrad at this like small, lovely university called Louis in Rome. And then there at the school, I guess I was one of the first international students that they had. So I did face a lot of challenges like engaging in school clubs. So like all the conversations you asked earlier about like, how can I join this club, that club? I didn't even have it at the time just because they had no clubs for me. But that was a very like interesting challenge to have. And I thought it was an advantage, like kind of a first mover advantage for a person like me, because I ended up founding the first 2 English speaking student associations at the university. So again, to your questions, sometimes if you find it like, if you cannot find a club that fits you, or it's hard to get in certain communities, you can just think about founding it as well. And yeah, I did found like a consulting club and a women in business society. And then I did a 3-year program. I then took a gap year. But then I realized I wanted to study more. So during this gap year, I was applying for master's programs, and I was fortunate to receive a couple of offers. Ended up going to Cornell because I got like a very good fellowship scholarship. And at Cornell, since now I'm a grad student, like the academic expectations is different also because I'm like a fellow, like a scholarship fellow, so I'm not as involved in student clubs anymore, but I'm like more involved in like department work, like teaching or research assistant. So that was about like my academic path. Onto the professional path. So during undergrad, I just had one internship. That was at Deloitte with their Ho Chi Minh City office in Vietnam. I was a financial advisory intern. Even though I realized that finance was not for me, but it really helped me think about like professional service as a path that I want to go in the future, where you kind of act like a third party, just like banking, like investment banking, like a third party giving advice to like different businesses. And so that kind of set like a foundation for me to go into my gap year, where I had two other internships in consulting at Deloitte, but this time with their Milan, Italy office, and Arthur De Litto, which is a strategy consulting firm with their Singapore office. And really those two experiences, those two internships, again, like confirmed that strategy consulting is a path that I want to pursue further. And as I started my master's, I recently had the opportunity to intern at McKinsey with their New Jersey office in the US. And again, like fortunate to be coming back there full time. I'm very excited for that because I had a really good time at the firm, and I will be sharing more later. So jumping on a little bit into consulting. So I think because Stephen gave a very like broad overview about investment banking earlier, so I would just like quickly describe what consulting firms do. So like in very simple terms, they help companies solve problems. When we talk about problems, they can literally be anything. So most of the time, like they are strategies for companies to grow, like to be more efficient with cost, to get more revenues, so on and so forth. But they could also be very niche problems that a lot of people don't know they actually solve for. For example, like a person I met at the firm this summer was helping the New York Metropolitan Transport Authority solve the trash management issue of subway stations in New York, for example. In terms of the day-to-day work, maybe it would be less predictable than investment banking, where you mostly have like clear questions to answer for deal by deal. In consulting, it's not as predictable, but at the same time, it could get very exciting and new because like every problem is different, every client is different. So that's like the dynamics of consulting. A little bit like personally to myself, like why I chose consulting. Everyone I've talked with, like current consultants, my peer interns, or even those who had left the firms, I guess like Stephen could also comment on this, but I think most people agree that consulting, whatever you talk about it, it's just a very valuable school to go to in some first few years of your career, for like 4 reasons I listed here. So first is the exposure. Again, like you get to work with companies from different sectors, like consumer technology space, or even public sector, as I just mentioned, and a lot of different topics as well. Again, from traditional business problems, but could also be like very interesting, like niche problems. And then ownership and impact, the second bullet point here. It's more of like the way, it's more of like your impact to the team's work. So like the way that these consulting firms operate is that they have small teams collaborate like project by project. So over the summer, I worked with a team of 3 other people, only like including me were 4. And so I got the chance to report directly to an associate partner who had like around 10 years of experience. And then we all like every like few days, we call it problem solve at McKinsey, which is basically like discussing with some partners, the senior partners who had like 20, 30 years of experience. And imagine like that kind of experience. I think it's like harder to find in other careers, but it's very common here in consulting. And yeah, and then the third bullet point in terms of great network, the people I met in consulting, not only at McKinsey, but also other firms in the past were like really like ones of the smartest people I met. And consulting is also unique in the way that you work very directly with clients. Like even if you are an intern, like a junior employee, for example, I did like sit in the same room, like having lunch with the CEO, CTO of this very big company in the logistics sector, for example, which I always thought if I worked in some other places, I would never have like such opportunity. And as you work in consulting, like with the great exposure to find out where you're actually interested in, like a specific topic, a specific industry that you want to go to, you can get like this network that you build along the way to eventually build something that you want in the future, or even stay in the firm and like continue on. So that's like a very like great package that like the career path offers. And then finally, obviously, it's like the intellectual challenges of the field. So a lot of the changes that you work on, especially at big firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, are very like forefront transformative changes. Sometimes you read the news about something and then like 1 or 2 weeks later, you kind of work directly on that. In my case, for example, this summer I was working with my team to help this like logistics last mile company implement Gen AI into their customer app. And after I left the internship for like 1 or 2 weeks, I went out and shipped the like a product using that company service, and I actually got to use the feature that me and my team were working on like a couple of weeks earlier. And I thought it's super cool, isn't it? Like to actually like see the impact of your work. So that is all about consulting, and like a little bit more on the recruiting experience and timeline. So preparation-wise for myself, I got interested also because I've been in school for a while. I'm a master's student. I got interested in consulting in the second year of my undergrad, so which was at 2022. So by the time I got the interviews at McKinsey, I was already casing for like a good 2 years and a half, like casing as in like preparing for case interviews, which is a big part of their recruiting process. And I thought like it was a like I could answer more questions on this later if we have, but that is a big part of the recruiting process. Another big part was coffee chatting. So I had conversations with probably around like 100 consultants at multiple firms, and like different markets. So I talked a lot with people in Vietnam, obviously, but also Italy and the US. And then about the McKinsey recruiting process specifically, it only took place 1 month, everything in total. So if you compare like the 1 month with everything that I did before that, which was like around 2 years. So that tells that I guess like just my case specifically, but I really attributed my success in this recruiting process for all the preparation I did before that, which was quite long. But I guess like with effective strategies, you could like totally shorten the time. But I guess like I agree with what Stefan said earlier, like IB or consulting are the paths that you kind of really have to put in the work. So back to my McKinsey recruiting process, there was this online assessment test which is solved very specific in like McKinsey way. They did it in like a game. I studied it with YouTube resources. So this was like really nothing so interesting. So we move on to the other bullet points here. The entire recruiting process for me was 5 interviews of 2 rounds in total. And each interview had like a case, like a business case that I had to solve with the interviewer. And these were difficult but easy in a way that like unlike IB in technical questions, you don't have a correct answers that they would check you against. But then it is difficult in a way that you have to show certain mindset, certain approach that could only be shown if you have practiced it in a while. So with all the people that I did like coffee chats earlier, I said like almost 100 people. When I received interview invitations from McKinsey, I reached out to them. I asked them to do mock cases with me. I also ran a lot of mock cases with my friends at Cornell, the people I knew in Italy, anyone like I found on Reddit. So that was like a process, but just like my personal experience. And then all in all, I realized that today's audience is like a lot of like freshmen and like sophomore year students, and I know that everyone is like very anxious and confused, but like I just have like some I guess would be broader reflection slash advice. In terms of networking, I would say the first thing that helped me a lot was having conversations with everyone. By saying everyone, I'm saying like peers, alumni, obvious, but also like professors. I think sometimes we like tend to forget that professors can be very helpful. And like if you're interested in IB, you should definitely talk, like have a conversations with a professor that you really respect, that really thinks that you do well, that is teaching you finance. Because even though they don't work in the field directly themselves, but surely they've been there long enough to have like classmates in the past that went to schools with them that are working in the industry, or their previous students working in the field. And if you do well, if they like you, and if they're a respectable people, like a respectable person, which most of the case they are, like a referral to connect from them would really help you get conversations with the people you want to. So definitely have conversations with professors. And like and with anyone, like any background. Don't just focus on the people in finance. Like have conversations with people in tech and anyway, because you never know what people, like who people know. And also like having a lot of conversations like this will also help you to build this communication skills, the very like particular skills that can help in this and then in this like career. And then second, it can be very overwhelming with like classes and clubs and all like campus jobs and friendships, like relationships, but always make sure to show like the most authentic and kind and empathetic version of you, because you will never know when like connections will come. And then with interview preps, I guess no matter if it's IB technical questions or case interviews, just always try to genuinely enjoy the process, like be really curious, because that will show in the interviews, and that will also help you get through the process earlier, like easier, instead of just like trying to like studying them, like memorizing them as if it's like a responsibility. And yeah, the final advice, I guess, is really like start early and start smart, which I know like Stephen and the team could have a lot of more advice to tell you later. Yeah, and that's it from my end.
Awesome. Thank you, Tantra. Tantra, can you go back actually 2 slides? I want to go back to your first slide. I want to comment something, and then Samarth, I'll pass to you. So there's one thing that we
Sure.
talked about. Yeah, can you go back to your first slide? Or
Yes.
yeah, actually, your second slide. Sorry, your second slide.
Oh yeah, yes.
And we're in the half weird thing zone. If you can do that.
Okay. Sorry about
Thank
that.
you. So one thing that I saw some questions earlier about, like, hey, I'm a freshman and people don't want to hire freshmen. Like, what the heck? How do I do this? And Tanshan does 2 techniques here, which I think are things that we talk to our students a lot about and are a little bit underdeveloped, I think, in most students, particularly international students. So, and that is not taking what we call the front door strategy, but taking a side door. So I'll just describe 2 ways that Tanshan did this here. So what that means is that instead of doing the thing that everyone else is applying to, you're actually doing the thing that's less competitive. It's a point of weakness in the system. You exploit it, you use it, and then it helps you build up your own credibility. So Tanshan does this twice. One, in that she said like, hey, there's no consulting club, what the heck, or in English maybe. Let me just start it. So that's awesome. Now she's founder of the consulting club. So amazing. That shows some legitimacy. That's a strategy that we see students take. And the second is that if you notice the locations of her internships, and if you actually go back to her LinkedIn or et cetera, you can see that she does a very, it's a distinct strategy, but an effective one, where you go for the point of weakness of large brands first in your own local context. So in her case, in Vietnam, which is easier to get than getting an offer in, let's say, in New York. And then she builds up credibility by doing that multiple times in Vietnam, then in Singapore, then in Italy, I think it'll be Italy, then Singapore, and then ultimately has this CV, which is, hey, I've worked at all these large international companies, and now I'm in the US. Can I get a job at McKinsey in the US? And so that's another strategy where the point of weakness there is that it's easier to get this job at Deloitte in Ho Chi Minh City than it is to get in San Francisco. So you go for that point of weakness, you get the offer, and then you build up from there. So that's just two strategies I know Tanh takes, which I think are pretty distinct to her and show off her hustling. I don't know, Tanh, if you want to add anything to that.
No, you caught me. That was actually my strategy.
Yeah. So that's a side that we call that a side door strategy. And that is, I think, something that most students don't observe, but something I think is important. Yeah. Tanh, do you want to talk about, there's a question about the H-1B change.
So from when I share my screen, I cannot see the questions.
Oh, the question is, are you worried about the H-1B change for 2026? How are you feeling about that?
All right, so personally, I was worried at first, but two things, right? One, I have one more year in school, and then I have 3 years of OPT. My program is STEM. So I think like the company can, I mean, the company, if they're optimistic, they can first think that it's gonna expire next year, if it will, or if not, I still have basically 3 years to work for them before I actually have to switch to H-1B, and a lot of things can happen in those 3 years. So I personally am not worried too much right now. But also, realistically speaking, also these consulting firms, they know that most people also like stay for like around 2-3 years. So I don't think it's an issue with like consulting, just because of like how the turnover goes. But I guess like for tech companies, they may worry a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just say, like, I've had, like when I was at McKinsey, some of my best friends were at McKinsey, like in LA or New York, New Jersey office, and then didn't get the H-1B lottery, and then moved to, because of these big firms, let's say the top like 20, like top, say 5 biggest consulting firms, the big bulge brackets, they have offices all over the world. They would likely move you then to whichever office you want to go to. My McKinsey friends, it was kind of, there was just fun, like someone to Beijing, someone to Tokyo, someone to Kenya, someone to London. London's like a really good destination people a lot to go to. And then if they want to come back, they do the L1 visa to come back. So pretty common to see that as well. But most, to Tangent's point, just leave. So that's what the firm does. Okay, awesome. That was amazing. I want to now transition to Samarth, and I'll give one meta piece of context on Samarth, who's worked at BCG, super talented. Is that Samarth is someone who had very clear goals from freshman year. Actually met him as a freshman. He was an intern for me. And he was one of our best interns. I was like, oh my God, you're so talented as a freshman, like complete hustler. And then also did a strategy that Tantra did of accumulating experience at different internships. And then ultimately got offer at BCG. But this is someone who is very clear, I think, probably from freshman fall is my sense. Samarth, you can speak to that, about that, who then was very, very effective and now might switch into finance, but you can talk about that as well.
No, thank you for the introduction, Stephen. I'm glad it came across to you as strategic. On my end, it just felt like I had no idea what I was doing in some senses, but I'm glad I managed to portray it off that way, which I think made me perfect for consulting, because a lot of consulting ends up becoming how you sort of present yourself, how you signal, and I think how you come across to the person sitting across from you, as opposed to perhaps how you actually feel inside. So I think what I saw from the previous presentation was there was like clear strategy, there was clear goal on, what consulting can bring. For me, why I was really attracted to consulting was because I had no idea what I actually wanted to do. And a lot of people gave me advice, which was, just find something you're passionate about. And it's at that point in my life, I realized I don't know exactly what I'm passionate about as an 18-year-old or as a 19-year-old. So consulting gives you this immense ability to be exposed to various different industries. And the exposure that it has to various different industries is very deep driven. Like you're able to understand problems which actual companies face, and you can figure out how they go about solving it, right? So even if, I mean, as a consultant, you're tremendously trying to create value for this company. And that's a bit of a jargonic term, but essentially what it means, or what it ends up meaning in like real life, is that you have to figure out a solution, you have to ideate it, you have to be able to ensure that it works in other markets. And then, a less spoken about, you have to try and make sure that all the stakeholders within a company, regulatory, client side, vendors, everyone is sort of aligned on that. And I think that becomes a very, very important aspect of it. And I'll get into a little bit why. So, a little bit of background on me. As Stephen said, yes, I interned with Stephen for my freshman summer. And then in the sophomore year, I went into the Bill Clinton Foundation, where I was working on public health consulting. I was traveling across rural India and trying to figure out how India's healthcare infrastructure across a couple of its states can be developed and how we can try and get more medicinal delivery to the last mile consumers in India. Post this, I worked at BCG. I managed to get a summer internship there. And there I was working with a public sector bank. And at this public sector bank, in some senses, I had to sort of try and understand how we can bring about a digital transformation for them. Oh, thank you, Stephen. Wow, that's what my LinkedIn looks like from this end. Okay, fantastic. But I think a couple of just trying to understand or trying to get into what I found was very relevant with consulting and my recruitment sort of practices. So I think the previous presentation spoke a lot about what I think should be done. And I think that is the most salient advice. So I don't want to try and overlap it as such with that. So I'm going to try and give whatever additions I can. And if there's some things that I have missed, please let me know and I'll be happy to sort of go over them. I think one thing that we found a lot, and when I say we, I'm referring to like my friend group, my college group, etc., was that broadly your resume is covered over three large buckets, right? And those buckets essentially are academics, extracurriculars, and internships. And a lot of people ask me, do these buckets weigh each other out? Is it the same? In my experience, I'm not sure if this is the universal truth or guideline, but I think academics might be the largest bucket. This doesn't, of course, mean that, if you have a slightly relatively weaker GPA, there's no chance for you. That's absolutely not the case. But I think because academics somewhat ends up becoming the most objective metric when comparing to your peer group, because with extracurriculars, with internships, the recruiter on the other side might not understand the club that you're from or the internship that you've done or the actual work that's been done within. But with academics, there's a somewhat more objective lens to it. So I think broadly speaking, academics should always be focus number one. I mean, of course, you should be trying things on the side, socializing, partying, but I don't think anything should come at the cost of sacrificing academics. I think that's been sort of a principle that I've kept throughout my college life. I myself was a summa cum laude graduate. Not entirely sure how I pulled that off, but in the sense that I think that was a really, really bright beacon for me on my resume, because I think even when you like send your resume in for somewhere, that's the first number that they look at. Coming to, I think, extracurriculars, a lot of conversation was had, I think, in the questions about clubs, right? And in my college, we had a host of these sort of consulting club, finance club, investment analyst club, right? And these are your sort of more renowned legacy clubs, right? And these are the ones which have been there for a fair amount of time since then. However, what I would say is that there is a slight, I'm going to paraphrase Stephen here, side door strategy that could potentially be used here. So essentially the way the clubs gain recognition is the fact that as alumni members start entering into your sort of dream companies, into consulting, etc., when, let's say I went to Ashoka University, for example, right? If I'm sitting in 2024, they will take, and I'm sitting for BCG, they will speak to the folks who got into BCG in 2022 before they have even come to Ashoka for the 2024 year and ask them, okay, what are the good clubs, right? Because we don't know, we haven't been at Ashoka University, so you tell us what the good clubs are. So a niche strategy which I try to utilize here is I try to find a club where it's a very, very recent or new club, somewhat adjacent to a soft skill or a management consulting skill. For example, I was in the student government. For example, I was in the Ashoka Negotiations Club. And that's not necessarily your finance, your consulting, but the founders and the presidents of those clubs had also made that transition to sort of, going into BCG or going into McKinsey. And as a result of which, that is top of mind. So when, you sort of go into and you try and BCG comes forth and asks their employees, what is the best club right now at Ashoka? Of course, they've heard Ashoka Consulting Club, they've heard Ashokan Finance Club, but the negotiation club, that sticks in their mind, right? This new club that's been formed, that sticks in their mind. So suddenly, I'm not saying you have like a free ticket into this company, but you have a somewhat more innovative spark and chance to try and get it. So with extracurriculars, I think that's more of a sort of novel strategy that one can approach. With internships, so I've gotten offers from BCG and a couple of other boutique consultings, and I've also gotten a couple of offers from a couple of large investment banking players in India. And for me, what internships I think really drove value, and I interned at BCG, I interned at the Clinton Foundation, but I think, and I'm not just saying this because Stephen's on this call, but I think working under Stephen in my first year summer was really helpful. And that's, I think, a little bit because at that point, Stephen's company was a little bit smaller. And as a result of which, the chance for me to come in and really drive value became that much easier. So in my first year summer, I think like a lot of you, I was very concerned, right? What if I don't find the right internship? What if I don't find, the one thing that's going to drive me into the future? What if I can't find that brand name? So I found this small little company called Lumiere Education. And as a result of that, for me, I was able to work with like a large team of contractors. I was able to handle a sort of budget to try and figure out how we can collect our leads. I was able to, and this all sounds great here, but it also sounds really good on paper, right? Because I was able to put into my resume hard numbers, exact ways that I was able to help them grow. And I think because what happens is, especially in contexts where I come from, it's almost easy for people in their first years to try and get these internships through their connections, through their families, right? To try and sort of ask I'm going to give a very broad example, but ask their sort of uncle to put them into an internship in this place, right? But they have nothing to show for it. So even if they have done that, and they get through to the interview, one question, and they will break because they don't remember anything. But because in my first year, I was able to work for a much smaller company, this stuff that I did, the impact that I drove, the value that I was able to add, those are things which are very, very not just, I think, close to my heart, but close to my mind and memory. And as a result of which, I was able to have a much more frank and honest conversation about what actually got done and how I was able to actually deliver. And as a result of which, if there are people who have a certain degree of anxiety about not in their freshman summer or even their sophomore getting into like a really high brand or a really high signaling company, I don't think it is the end of the universe, because as long as you are in a place where you're able to consistently and more importantly, visibly drive value, I think that's something which can really, really work to your advantage. So those three buckets, I think just another top line thing I'd say, because there was a lot with casing and trying to understand the business problems of it. I think one thing which for me really worked out in consulting is I had to remember that the interviewer on the other side, right? While of course they care about my technical know-how, they care about how I sort of think, how I structure, they also know that I am going to be working with this person for the next maybe 2 or 3 years, right? So when it's 11 p.m. and the boss has gotten a deadline on us and we are all absolutely dying, does this person still have a sense of humor which makes them nice to sort of sit next to? And I think one thing that happens is when we're prepping for these interviews, when we're trying to, learn all these different frameworks, these different technical skills, we forget about a very, very human element of it. And I understand that this might sound basic, like especially for a lot of freshmen who are here, that, how do you forget how to be a sort of functioning, nice human being? Trust me, it's a lot easier than, ashamedly, it's a lot easier to forget those aspects of it and to forget that the person in front of you is also a human, and you need to not just convince them that you're a good consultant. You need to, in some ways, also convince them that you can grab a beer after work with them. And I think that's not often talked about as much when we're talking about like strategy in some senses. But yeah, I think that's sort of a snapshot and background of what I have, and happy to take on any other questions that may come.
Awesome, cool. And I think we can transition to questions. I just want to say one thing that's distinct about Samarth, and actually you can see in both of their profiles, this is a strategy. This is more of a this is a general career strategy, but I think both Tanjin and Samarth did it, is that you can observe how they are doing this like ladder escalation of brands. This is a bit about like the career development aspect. In Samarth's case, Samarth went from working at kind of a random startup, in this case with me, but at least with someone who has like previous worked at McKinsey, et cetera, to then working at the Clinton Foundation. Okay, that's more recognizable. To then working at consultant, to then getting the BCG offer. That's a pretty common path for the consulting side. And then Tantra on the other side. I think for you, your first summer, you were at like a oil and gas company or something in Vietnam. Is that right?
Oh
You
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
I was doing
Yeah,
some
that
stock.
was yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was like a one after my freshman. Yeah, it was with the oil and gas company. I almost forgot about that actually.
Yeah, right. I don't know how much that, but you can see. I'm just gonna screen share on Tantra's
Yeah, sure.
on your links. But
And that definitely helped with the first Deloitte internship. Because I was not in like any target school, like not really in Vietnam, no one knew about my school in Italy. But at least people knew about this like petroleum mix company. That is like a pretty big one in Vietnam. And so I think it really helped.
yeah. And so I think that's less about like specifics. This doesn't mean you have to work at an education startup, or it doesn't mean you have to work at whatever, but it's about like your freshman year getting something that has some storytelling capacity. Of course, you also want to learn there, and then slowly building up on top of that. So by the time you get to your sophomore summer, junior summer, you're really well positioned. Finance is much faster than these two. So that means that in finance, you need to, in your first 18 months, probably have an internship that's somewhat relevant, and then also have clear club connections that then allow you to say, hey, I'm really interested in finance, and here are some examples of why that is the case. So it's a bit faster consulting. You have a little bit more time to like accumulate experiences on top of each other to then say, hey, I'm a good candidate for this role. Okay, cool. I think we can transition to some questions from the audience. We have a little bit of time left. And so I don't know if you want to say anything on.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. Let me I want to share my last page.
Yeah.
Okay. Before answer questions, welcome anybody. If you have a question, you wanted to raise your hand. I can also open mic, let you to have conversation directly with Stephen and also his team. In the meantime, if you wanted to have a one-on-one consultation, would like to asking personal questions, you don't want to be, asking in front of everybody, you're welcome to scan the barcode on the right-hand side. That way somebody, IvyCompass team will be follow up with you, connecting with the right person, answer any questions, or maybe even get into the so-called training phases or coaching phases to make sure your kids have enough time to prepare step by step to the final, dream job. If you only wanted to, I'm not ready, I wanted to watching, you can be going to a group. We will have a group designated to the internship and also final first year after graduation of full-time job. We have an IvyCompass WeChat, which is Stephen and Jimmy will be in that group as well. That way you have questions, you can continue in that group asking questions. If, just happened after the presentation, you thought about it, you could not sleep, you are thinking your kids might have a chance to looking for and finding a dream job, you can also ask a question tomorrow. The team will be in that group to answer questions, okay? So this is the 2 barcode. You're welcome to scan either one. The right-hand side is directly follow up this program directly, and the left-hand side, the barcode is going to the WeChat group. You will continue in the group, ask questions, or just, watching out and save for later kind of thing. Okay, anyone? I see there's somebody raise hand, so I'm going to go to the person. Lily, I'm just unmute you, so you can unmute yourself and ask question directly, Lily. Are you there, Lily? Okay, Nathan, you can also unmute yourself and start speaking.
Hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
I just want to ask, how much does doing good in high school events like, placing at ICDC and Warren Investment Challenge matter for networking and internships?
I can just take a quick pass at this. So you should think about your high school experiences essentially disappearing by the time you're at the end of your freshman year. So it's almost a complete reset by the time that you're entering your freshman summer. Though those initial experiences, if they're like particularly incredible, can help you out usually with that first internship. And if you won like first place internationally at something, then you can still talk about that. I had like a perfect ACT score, so I kept that on my resume for a few years. I was like, flexing around with that, but it doesn't matter that much, to be honest. So that's an opportunity. It also means that you need to start usually accumulating from early days when you're doing it. Yeah, Samarth, you have something to add?
I think sorry.
Okay.
I think just one way that you could perhaps leverage it, even if not necessarily, but I think Stephen's quite right. Once you've gotten into college, high school sort of starts disappearing a little bit. But I think if you have any team members that you remember, any competitors that you remember, or any judges that you were particularly fond of, I think like it's a good sort of hook to reach out to them on LinkedIn, especially if they're doing something exciting or cool or even remotely interesting now. And it's a nice way to sort of build out your network. It might not have the direct ROI which you're potentially looking for, but I think like if it's still fresh enough that it happened maybe a year back, then perhaps it might be a good sort of foundation to reach out with in the very least.
Great, thank you. So Lily, do you still want to speak, Lily Lee? You can unmute yourself, Lily Lee, last name Li Lee. I just unmute you. Or maybe you raised hand by accident. Okay. Stephen, do you see any question have not answered in chat box?
I see one question from Joy, which is talking about difference in cultures in McKinsey versus other firms. Maybe, Tajin, do you want to talk about that? Because I know you've interned at different consulting firms. I'm curious if you've seen differences.
Yes, so I can talk about McKinsey versus Deloitte. I was at Deloitte Consulting, which I think they did very similar things with Accenture. So culture, I think I'll talk about 2 things within culture. One is more of like the like working culture. I guess at McKinsey, I felt that people respected the junior people more, just because again, like the structure is very flat. Like the partners can listen to you and like really take your inputs into account. Well, I found at bigger firms, or like more more hierarchical firms like Accenture or Deloitte, you have this like less ownership or like less access to senior people compared to McKinsey. So that's in terms of the working culture. But on the other hand, of course, that would mean that there are way more expectations from you as a junior compared to at Deloitte. So at Deloitte or Accenture, I think my friends at Accenture also said that you usually only are assigned like a small part of the work. So yeah, definitely less expectation. And in terms of the social culture, so I thought like at both Deloitte or McKinsey, people were very like nice and like very motivating. Like they always want you to do better, and they always, I think like feedback culture is very strong at these companies. So definitely very motivating. I do see that at McKinsey for me because the pace is a little bit faster. So people might have less time to, you know, like actually hang out with each other and things. But I think like everyone, like I met a lot of kind people at both of the firms. I don't know if that helps.
I see a question from Chris about how to transfer different college and sophomore year impact the internship recruiting. This can matter quite a bit, actually. And we have a number of students who transfer in their sophomore year to usually another school. We have two, actually, one who transferred to Penn, another who transferred from NYU to USC. It matters quite a bit because different universities, as Tanjiro was saying earlier, lead to different outcomes in terms of which firms recruit for you. Of course, you can pretty much get into any firm from any college if you're like, you know, crazy hustler and extremely like creative, but it really matters quite a bit. So if you go up to, you kind of like, let's say, go up a level in prestige, for example, usually that opens up a set of firms you wouldn't otherwise have. But it also means that you have to start redoing stuff like your extracurriculars, finance clubs, etc. So it's a double-edged sword. Usually if you get into a better university, or like better just in the sense of rankings in this case, then it's usually a good move if you can pull it off. Of course, a lot of difficulty, but what kind of clubs are for consulting jobs? Some of the attention, either you guys answer. I would say there are consulting clubs usually that you can get involved in. That's usually the most one-to-one answer. But most business clubs, I think, are a decent fit. I don't know if either of you guys want to speak to that.
I think in large part, I think what Stephen said is right. But I think if you can get a leadership position at sort of any business club or any club that does a lot of event work, external stakeholder, like they call speakers, they call sessions, etc. I think it's really helpful for you yourself, but it also pays off really well in the sense that on your CV, you can talk about management, you can speak about leadership experience, you can speak about, you know, handling these various groups of people, leading a particular change. And I think that in that regard, that becomes really helpful. So yeah, I think consulting club would be the best, but I think if you don't get into there, like I didn't get into my college's consulting club, it sort of fuels you to another path, which I think you can also carve out and make your own.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not necessarily like it doesn't necessarily have to have the consulting word in the name. Sometimes it could also be like social impact club, or like at the end of the day, I agree with Samarth. It's more about what you did in the club, and this like problem solving leadership elements are there in whatever the clubs that you're in, and you can tell the stories about those experiences in your CV, then you're good. Yeah, it doesn't really have to be strictly like business or consulting.
Yeah, and I think I see a question about like, you know, a specific question of like college newspaper. I think it can certainly be helpful, but ideally you want to be at a leadership position in that university or on the business side of the newspaper. It's usually more useful than being like a sports desk reporter. I think is moderately valuable, but not that valuable. But of course, if you enjoy it, that's fine. Like, I mean, not everything has to be about consulting. So consulting's a little bit more forgiving, I would say, than finance, in the sense that like consulting firms want interesting people. So if you're interesting, that's actually going to be valuable. Investment banks, honestly, don't care that much if you be interesting. Like, it's not that important as a criteria, at least from my experience. I mean, Now, what I mean by interesting is I mean like you have to be charismatic. You have to be interesting to talk to. That actually matters a lot in these interviews for both investment banking and consulting. And all of our mentors are really awesome people. But your profile can be very finance oriented and probably should be for finance, even for asset management. For consulting, you can be kind of like walking like a bit more of a random path. And then as long as you're doing well in it, you can be competitive. Cool. I see Maggie has a question about college students. Yeah. So we have students who are like master's students who graduated a few years ago who are looking to switch roles as well. So we do help out those students. And it's more similar to being like a last year master's student, to be honest, if you're already in the workforce, but the strategies are quite similar. We have students who have worked for 4 or 5 years and then come back to work with us. Though of course, most students are. Yeah,
the form, if you feel the form is not suitable for your child's background, don't, just do the best you can, because ultimately somebody's going to follow up with you and then we'll be connecting with the team. Then you can have unique situation background expressed to that contact person. The form majority at this moment, yes, we're focused on college student, but does not matter. The team's still able to helping if you graduate from 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. They're still able to help you. So just do the best you can to fill the form, but or contact somebody in our team in the WeChat. We will be asking more questions that way. Any other questions we have not answered?
I see one more on two quick questions, one on asset management, one on consulting. Asset management, I think very similar to investment banking, except there's less technical curriculum.
Oh, by the way, Steven, I'm sorry. Can you repeat, because some of them only list the question to host and panelists, so the audience doesn't know what the question is. If you could read the question first and then provide an answer, would be better.
I hear one question. Any suggestions on asset management would be appreciated. So asset management is very similar to investment banking, except it's a little bit easier to get into, and it requires less technical. So you don't need to be as good at like financial modeling to get asset management. It's more of a behavioral type interview. It's more relationship oriented. So there you want to be practicing more your behaviorals, but otherwise you want to show interest in finance, etc. To be successful in those applications. I see another question, which is what major for consulting job? The major does not matter so much, but what you do want to think about is you want to signal ability. So how do you signal ability? You do hard things, you do them very well. So if you have a 4.0 and you are taking computer science, you're going to be a stronger candidate if you have 4.0 and you're taking English. Because for most schools, like Harvard's an example, computer science is more difficult to get a 4.0. And it's a more technical field. So actually for Harvard, for example, in my class at McKinsey, it was like 4 of 6 who got offers actually studied computer science, stat, or applied math. So, and that's because, again, the signaling function is better there than if you did, let's say, sociology, which is also lovely, but it's just not as difficult. So you generally want to do well. It doesn't matter so much what major you take, but you want to do well within it. And if you are comparing like things, the more difficult the major, the better signaling function it is for consulting. Yeah. So Samarth's a good example. And we do coaching for quant finance, quantitative finance. That's right. I see a question about coaching for quantitative finance, and yes, we do coaching for quantitative finance. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Any more questions? Okay. Just repeat, if you would like to have further conversation, asking more details about your situation and also what are you thinking about, also the details, the time, coaching details, service structure, pricing, everything, welcome to scan the barcode on the right-hand side. That way somebody will follow up with you. And we're providing even more detail with the service structure and also the price structure. And if you just pondering, looking, and also want to hear more information, scan the barcode on the left-hand side. That way you will be welcomed to invited to a WeChat group. You can continue ask questions and also think about what you wanted to do. There's more question come in. Stephen.
Rachel asked a question: is there a difference between a 3.8 and a 4.0 GPA in terms of finding job and internship? I think, and Samarth, you can speak to this. I think the short answer is yes, there is a difference. If you have and the reason for that is a 4.0 is uncapped in how good you are. So if you get a 4.0, you could be much better than anyone else. But a 3.8 signals that you are not the best, right? So there is a difference. Now, how much does it matter? Probably not. Like I had like a 3.93 or something, or 9.4. I mean, if I had a 4, probably would have been slightly better. It's not a crazy difference, but it is a difference. So I just want to say, like, there is, I mean, I think people often are like way too nice about this. They're like, oh, you know, it's like all the same. You got 3.8, it's all the same. It's actually not all the same. A perfect GPA is better than a 3.8 by a lot. But it's totally fine to have a 3.8 and you can still be competitive as well. That's just kind of the reality. I think that, I don't know, Samarth or Thanh, you guys have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier also, like your school, like where your school is on the ranking also matters into this question. Like if you go to Harvard, like 3.8, I'm sure is super cool. But for example, myself, I was aware that my undergrad was not a target school, so I always aimed for a perfect grade. Because I know that like even at like a small school and I didn't even have like perfect grade, it signaled that I'm not the best. So kind of agree with what Stephen just said.
So I think my experience may have been a little bit different, although I would fully listen to Stephen's advice that yes, completely aim for that perfect score, because I think it really does leave a different impression in the mind of the recruiter. But I think for us, the process that was followed is that you see the resume, you make the shortlist post the resume, and then you head into the interview. And I think once you get past that shortlisting phase, I'm not sure how much your GPA matters within the interview. Then it becomes a lot more about behavioral, your case, how you're presenting, like who the interviewee is, etc., etc. So I think what you should have a very good rationale about is that your scores aren't an absolute measure. They're relative to the rest of your batch and the rest of your sort of competing cohort. So keep an eye on that. And I would like always recommend that, you know, stay in the at least 90 percentile or 95 percentile of your batch, right? Because I think, I mean, especially if you're applying for campus placements or you're looking to be recruited from your college, that is definitely like an important measure to remember.
Good.
Well, thank you guys so much. It was really great. Big thank you also to Sophia for bringing this. I love working with you, and you're such a superstar. And also to Thanh and Samarth for sharing this. Really, really helpful to get your all's perspective.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess we answered all the questions and great session. We learned so much. This is for a lot of people, a lot of parents were not thinking of. I think it's good for them to at least be aware of. That's how competitive it is, especially the job market right now. It's not so as favoritism to the young graduates. So if we learn this ahead of time and prepare ahead of time, then you could be that one. Yeah, you could be that one. Maybe land it to somewhere you feel happy and building up your career. Thanks again, Stephen, for your wonderful team to make this information very informative. And thank you, Allison, for the background technology support. And thank you, everyone, to supporting us tonight, to accompany us for wonderful time of almost 2 hours of sharing. And looking forward to hear from you guys again in the next period of time. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. Have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye now.